Welcome to this Cyberdyne Warrior bonus content. I was reading the excellent games that weren't website and noticed that Cyberdyne Warrior has an unused intro and some bitmap graphics for loading screens and stuff like that. So let's have a little look at it, shall we? See what we can find. Running this in C64 debug GUI, we start off with this intro showing the standard kind of like nice scrolling color bars with a star field but against a light blue background with the standard kind of like Apex scrolling color bar effect in the characters type effect. Kind of reminds me a lot of Creatures, of course. I think a very similar effect was used in that. This intro sequence is a little bit unfinished because it doesn't have any music or sound effects going along with it. So it's going to be silent. But there we go, we can see a nice sprite-based ship, a mixture of multicolor and what looks like high-res sprites along with it too. Another bitmap screen. Nice intro, actually. I really do like the graphics in this. It wasn't part of the final game release, you see, so that's why it was on the games that weren't website. And then we have a third bitmap screen with some walkers and then the main character coming out of their spacecraft and then jumping down. And then another walker comes along on the right and then it kind of like resets and then goes back to the ready prompt. Okay, so that's cool. That wasn't in the game. It's very nice to be able to see it though. So thanks very much for games that weren't, and also the Rolands for agreeing that it can be put up there. There was also a disk with some other image files on there as well on the games that weren't website. So let's have a look at what those files are. Okay, so let's run it. Okay, there's the disk menu. Then it goes from the disk menu and then it brings up a disk directory of files that are on there. So let's have a look at each of these image files. I don't think there's going to be any sprites overlaid on them, but you never know. So I think once you select one file, it doesn't really give any indication it's loading or anything. Well, a disk drive would if you had a real disk drive. But there's no disk indicator light that I can see on this version of the emulator debugger. Is it still loading or is it waiting for me to use a joystick or something or a keyboard? What's it doing? Oh, okay. Yes, it is loading. There we go. It's loading. Let's jump ahead. There we go. That's the first screen. So the Cyberdyne Warrior looks like a loading screen, right? Very nice. Very distinctive style, of course. The next screen, Apex 2. Let's jump ahead. So a rather nice looking spaceship against a planetary and stars background. Very nice. Next file, Apex 3. Just finishing loading, and there we go. Actually, the guy on the left looks, well, the face looks a little bit like, yeah, Vladimir Putin. An unusual choice, but okay, maybe it's not. Maybe it's somebody else. Yeah, there we go. And then Apex 4 is, okay, it's a car. I don't think that this is kind of part of Cyberdyne Warrior, right? Maybe it's something else? A different game that they were working on, perhaps? Concept, maybe? On the website, there's a now we just need someone to patch everything together and release a 100% version. So to be able to do that, we need to get a pristine copy of the game. Oh yes, apologies if you can hear rain in the background. We're in the middle of a tropical storm at the moment. So we have these 5 files from the slideshow disk, a slideshow viewer, and then the 4 image files that we just saw. But I'm just wondering if there's anything else on the D64 file. So let's use my tweaked C1541 tool to use the recover option to see if we can recover any extra files we might not have, but we can also try. It's not too much effort. Oh, I see. Quite a few extra files, right? So there are some large 18 kilobyte files, and there's several actually. There are some 1 kilobyte files. Let's have a look at these files in the hex editor. These files, one of the large files seems to load at 3C00. it seems to contain quite a lot of data. I wonder what that could be. And then there is a very small file of 1 block, and that's not a surprise. Track 18 sector whatever is usually in the directory block or directory track. These are normally just directory sectors. Face, dragon, bat, then. That seems to be an unused directory entry. So maybe there were some deleted files on this D64. Look, there's another large file, and there's another large file. Maybe we can load these files up in ICU64 and then use the memory viewer with the graphics debug view to see what these files contain. I don't think we'll be looking at these shorter files. They seem to not contain much useful information, right? They seem to be mostly blank. But the large files are definitely interesting to me. So where are the large files? It's just these ones, right? So let's load them one by one. All we need to do is just drag one file onto the emulator window, and it will just load it straight away. And then we can use the graphics map view, probably in bitmap mode, and then see what we have. That's intriguing. It seems to have a lot of data plus a bitmap. Okay. That looks like a dragon, doesn't it? Of some description. A serpentine dragon. Nice. Okay. And then let's have a quick look at the next file. What's this one? I'm not too sure what that is. Okay, that looks like a fleshy skull face or something like that. Okay. And then, last file, is that one? It's got some more data as well, previous. Okay. So it's got quite a lot of preceding data. And then this one seems to be truncated. It seems to be a little bit corrupted. I think it's probably a deleted file then. And this is bat Sven. But if you remember the file name from that directory block listing, I think, or that partial directory block. Yeah, that looks like a fleshy, scully face type thing, doesn't it? Okay. The other one again, what was it? Looks like a knight. A knight in shining armor, perhaps. The text screens, there are 4 of them plus 1, 8, which makes 8 plus 1, 9. So we've got 1 for the color RAM, and then we've got 8 for other color screens. So this tells me that it's kind of like an FLI mode image. There's 1 bitmap plus 8 other color screens plus the color RAM screen. Right, that's an awful lot of extra data. We'll need to find a FLI viewer to view these screens properly. We can do that later on. Right now I'm going to concentrate on trying to link in the intro to the game and the loading screens. So we need a pristine copy of the game, and I'm going to try and get that from the tape file. So this is a normal kind of like cyber load by the looks of it, just loading a larger loader at the end of memory, and then it just calls that code and it just loads a ton of extra data. This tape version of the game, when it was released, doesn't contain any loading screen, doesn't contain any intro, it just contains the game. Let's zoom ahead a bit. What we need to do, actually, is that we need to find out the end of the loader, and I think it's that jump indirected there through to 1.6 in hex. And I think that just basically then jumps to the start of the game, loaded game code, right? Here's the usual kind of trick for this tape turbo loading system. To do that, let's just get towards the end. Coming towards the end of the load, and there we go. It hits the jump indirected through 1.6 in hex. We have a whole bunch of cleared memory at the beginning. We have the start address, which is 80D. There we go. Looks like, starts with, okay, so it looks like the sys 2061 at the beginning was blanked out with the zeros. But yeah, we've got some, what looks like, let's try and disassemble it. There we go. So we've got stopping the interrupt, stopping NMIs, start copying data from the start to the end of memory. It then starts copying chunks of code into 100, which is the stack, and then it also starts storing data into D8, DA, the color RAM, basically, decompressing the low and high nibbles from memory. We've got thunder in the background now as well. Apologies if that's too loud. It then seems to be initializing the SID. Okay, so this looks like a particular version of a freezer cartridge, perhaps, or some handcrafted kind of like freezer style code, which just basically stores all of the state in memory. What we'll do is that we'll save out a whole bunch of data from 800, which is the start of BASIC in hex, all the way up until F800, so F7, so F7FF, all the way up until that memory. We don't want to save out the current cyberload, and we don't need to save out the lower parts of memory for the screen, and we don't need to save out the extended 0 page or anything like that. So we'll just save out that chunk, 800 to F7FF. And then what we'll do is that we'll try to use my compression tool and then see if the game will run from that compressed version. That would be a good test because we need a pristine, unaltered version of the game to work with. So I'm going to use my compression tool to compress that large amount of memory, hopefully into a small amount of memory. So we'll use the MUB option, which is max ultimate compression with border enabled. The input file is Cyberdyne Warrior 80D. 80D is the start address that was being used from the tape turbo loader. So there we go. We'll just save that as cw.prg. Off it goes and compresses. And then once it finishes compressing, let's just run cw.prg in another emulator, in another instance of Vice, basically not the one that's attached to C64. And yes, there we go. Game works, or at least title screen of game works. That all seems to be fine. Then if the title screen works, I'm pretty sure that the game works. Okay, so good. We have a working extracted version of the tape version of Cyberdyne Warrior. Now we need to understand the intro. So we need to patch the intro to load the game afterwards, right? So let's run the intro and see how it does a reset. See if we can find some clear memory that we can use as for a little patching code. There's some memory here, look, in the first bank, probably at 2800 or thereabouts. And there's a lot of free memory as well, or at least memory filled with the same byte pattern up at the end of memory in the last fake bank. Okay. So the intro, if you remember from when we were running it in C64 debug GUI, it resets. So let's put a break on FCE2, which is the standard-ish kind of like kernel reset routine entry point. It might not call that, of course, but it might do. Let's see, is it going to hit the breakpoint? Yes, it does. FCE2 is in the kernel. Let's bank it to the CPU. There we go. That's what the CPU can see. So the kernel is banked in at this point as well. We need to remember that because that kind of like limits our ability to put initial patch code into the end of memory up underneath the kernel. So it's being called from 1D98, right? So we can put a breakpoint on 1D98. And what do we get if we patch out the jump to reset at 1D98? Well, let's just do a little experiment and check. So here we go, running the intro again. We're going to hit the breakpoint at 1D98. We're going to get rid of the jump by covering it over with 3 EA bytes, which is no op. So that gets rid of the jump instruction to the reset routine. Let's continue on now. And then if we allow the intro to continue on, those walkers keep on walking around in the most significant X coordinate. Look. That's funny. They can't walk over to the left-hand side again. They just keep on sticking on the right-hand side. Okay, well, there we go. That's the limit of the current code that's in the unseen version of the intro. So, okay, what we can do then is potentially use that point in the intro to then jump to some code which we can patch in later on to basically then load the game file. So I'm thinking about creating linked pictures with the linked intro and the game on a disk image on a D64. So let's have a look at what we get. So what we need to do though is that we need to extract the intro after it goes through all of this kind of like unfreeze process, right? So this looks like freezer code or unfreezing code, right? So it looks like it's a frozen version. I don't quite exactly see which version of a free, it might be Action Replay or it might be the Ultimate cartridge or whatever, right? Don't know, don't really care. All I care about is getting at the memory up until the point where it's going to start executing the game, start executing the intro, sorry, but after it's decompressed everything into RAM. Okay, so I want a nice pristine copy of that. So I want to basically unfreeze what has been frozen, so then I can effectively patch it later on with some extra code. So like most freezer code, it jumps around in zero page quite extensively, decompressing stuff, but eventually it gets to like this instruction here for an RTI, which is where it sets up the final registers. It's using an RTI to then return, or to pull off the processor status, and then to return to an address. And it's returning to an address at AD2B with the basic and kernel ROMs enabled. So the CPU is executing basic code. So it's restoring to a point while executing what looks like in the middle of a basic program. And it looks like the basic program is, it looks like the basic program is basically Apex REM maybe and a sys 496. So it looks like, oh, maybe it's doing a for loop, right? Maybe that's a for loop. Maybe there's a REM with Apex or printing Apex. Maybe it's going through a for loop. Okay, okay. Then it does, okay, so that's the start of the intro code, which does a JSR to FFD2. Okay, but it's at AD2B. So we need to find AD2B, and I think that's in the basic ROM, right? So let's have a look at the ROM disassembly. So ROM disassembly AD2B. In the middle of the next command in basic. Okay, and the disassembly for that matches the disassembly that we could see there. So we are definitely in the middle of a basic program in a for next loop. Probably a delay before sys 496, which then starts the intro. That's my working theory anyway. It kind of like makes sense. You want a bit of a delay so you've got time to press the freezer cartridge freeze button and then generate a freezed version. And you want to do that on a nice blank screen, right? So you have a little short delay with the for next loop. Not too long, not too short, just enough time just to hit that button and then to let it continue on. So when it unfreezes, it continues the execution of the for next loop for a delay, and then it just runs the intro with sys 496. A freezer cartridge is really useful for generating like a final version of something. You don't need to worry about reinitializing your state or anything like that. The freezer cartridge code, the unfreezer portion of it will handle all of the machine state for you, so you don't need to worry about that so much. It's useful, it's a shortcut. Anyway, so because it's a frozen program, and because there's quite a lot of state, we're going to save pretty much the whole of memory from 200 to FFFF. And there we go. It's started the code at 496, and then it runs the intro. Okay, cool. So there we go. We know how that works now. So let's reset and load all of that memory, and then let's just go 1000 in hex, which is 496 in decimal, and there we go, magic. The intro code that we've extracted runs again. So that's good. So what we can do now is that we can try to use my compression tool again to see if we can get that code working from the compression tool. That's the next thing to check. Because it was coming from basic, we should really set the processor port to the default value, which is 37, right? Yep, 37 while running basic. So that maps in the basic ROM and also the kernel ROM. So we want to make sure that the decompression, when it runs, sets that back again. And then we'll just run that compressed version, and then we'll see if it works. So let's run that new compressed version of the intro in a new emulator window, and ta-da! Okay, so that's a compressed version of the intro working. Now we just need to put everything together. So we need to display the pictures. We need to patch the intro to then load a bit of extra code for running the game, and then everything should be fine. Then we can put it in a disk image. So a little bit of coding later on. We take these files from the original assets from the games that weren't websites. So the 3 image files, the pristine version of the game, and also the pristine version of the intro. And we use the image files along with a little bit of machine code, or assembly language rather, which obviously assembles to machine code, just to load each image file. You'll notice that the screen for the bitmap is at C400, that's the extra color data, and then the bitmap itself is stored automatically by the compressed memory to E1000 in hex, and then the bitmap color RAM was at C800. So the assembly directives were just including that memory there for the bitmap screens in their set space. And it was just displaying the memory but while copying it. This intro patch code basically patches some extra code for initializing the machine, loading, and then running the game, and it patches that at 2A00, and then it copies it up to the high end of memory because we can't execute code from where we just loaded the large game from, right? There's a build it batch file which builds all of these separate picture displaying pieces of code, and the intro patched intro with the link code, and then also the compressed game. And then the final thing in the batch file just creates the files in a blank D64 file. So once it's finished compressing or assembling and compressing and putting all of those files into the disk image, it takes a while to compress because it's the ultimate version of the compression. It's quite slow, but it's very efficient. We can then run the disk image, and the first file that loads, that's magic. There we go. First file displays the first loading image. Watch the memory events in the memory view window as well. Loading the next one. So I've put in a little sparkly screen effect as well by claiming the stop vector. So it just tweaks the border color while loading. It also stops you from being able to press stop. There's the next loading screen, which is the loaded. That's where the loaded data is when it decompresses. That's the spaceship. The third loading screen should be the one with the people on it and the guns. There we go. Then it should load the patched intro code, which is of course compressed. You can see from the graphics map debug view there that the data is, quite noisy and random looking. That's because it's very highly compressed. And it loads quite a lot of data. So we'll just walk past this a little bit, I think. So it's currently loading the intro from the disk image now. Don't forget that the intro code needed to be patched so that it displays the default screen and makes sure that the basic kernel ROM is enabled and stuff like that. So there we go. It's displaying that nice scrolly message. Well, scrolling color bars and the color cycling message, right? And there we go. Everything looks fine, right? So we've got the bitmap screens. There's our extra code that we patched in to the intro into that blank area of memory. Now it contains a whole bunch of extra code for us to circumvent the reset and to do what we want. And there we go. Doink, doink, player jumping around. And what else? What else do we get? Last thing is that it then loads the game. So the patch code loads the game. Quite a lot of data. Even when the game is heavily compressed, it's still quite a large file. And there we go. There's the linked game. So there's the 3 loading screens with the intro and then the linked game after it. So that worked quite well. I hope you enjoyed this video which goes through how to add a whole bunch of extra link code and how to extract pristine copies of game data and stuff like that from tape turbo load versions. As usual, I will put all of the links for the source code for all of these extra patches and everything like that in my GitHub repository, and I'll put a link to that in the video description below. I'll also try and remember to put a link to the Games That Weren't website and everything else. Oh, there was one last thing, wasn't there? There were those what I think are FLI pictures in that in those recovered data files from the D64 that was on the Games That Weren't website. So let's have a little look at that, shall we? So we'll be using this FLI viewer, the PAL version from this website, the Zimmers.net website. I'm not going to bother coding my own FLI viewer when there's one already existing. So we'll just run that first of all, just by dropping the PRG file on there. And of course, there's nothing in the memory apart from default stuff. So what we need to do now is that we need to load the first recovered data file from that D64 on the Games That Weren't website, which is the dragon image, if you remember. And then we need to restart the FLI viewer, and the FLI viewer starts at, 80D. So this isn't probably going to be perfect, but it might be good enough to, oh, well, there we go. That's almost perfect. There are some horizontal bars across the screen. That might be because the color RAM is not perfectly initialized, maybe, possibly. Anyway, or maybe, I don't know. Anyway, so basically that's almost what the picture should look like, I think. A serpentile dragon, blue in color with a gray ball and splashing in some water. Yeah, maybe the color initialization is not completely correct, but it should be good enough to get a decent sense about what these pictures are. This picture might not have come from Apex, of course. I don't know if it has or hasn't. There is a signature in the bottom right. I can't really read what it says. And the picture is not familiar to me. Of course, I don't know all of the pictures in C64 land, so if you know who created these pictures or where they're from, then you might want to put a comment in the video description below, or in the comments section below, rather. Oh, look at that. That's a knight in shining armor on a white horse with a lance. Okay, there's another credit there. Ogami, is it? Maybe? Okay. So I don't think these are from Apex. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe they are. Maybe they aren't. But they were on that disk, and they were recovered files. So you know, we might as well have a little look. So let's load the next one. But yeah, like I say, if you know where they're from or who drew them, then yeah, please do put a comment in the video below, and then we can all find out together. They're quite nice pictures, even without the color data being perfectly initialized. You still get a good sense of what the data should be, right? Oh, there we go. Ooh, okay, a fleshy, scully type, horrible face type thing. Ugh, okay, yeah, not very nice. Not my cup of tea. I mean, technically it's a nice piece, but the subject matter is not my cup of tea. Let's have a look at that last picture, which is truncated data. Right, and that's bat Sven, which corresponds to that file name in the partial directory block from earlier, I think. So yes, if you like these kind of technical deep dive videos, then please do consider liking or subscribing to this channel, or sending me a super thanks. They are always very much appreciated. Take care, have a great day, evening or night, wherever you are.